The first time Thomas Reed heard those words, he thought he'd misunderstood. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, the kind of day when autumn rain taps against windows like impatient fingers. His bookstore, Reed's Corner Books, sat tucked between a laundromat and a pharmacy on Maple Street. Not the wealthiest part of town, but not the poorest either. Just ordinary, comfortable, safe. Thomas was restocking the children's section when he heard the small voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir. Can I buy a dad?" He turned around, expecting to see a parent nearby, maybe playing along with a child's game. But there was no parent. Only a little girl, maybe 8 years old, standing in the middle of his bookstore with rain dripping from her too thin jacket. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face. Her sneakers, once white, were now gray with street grime, and in her small, trembling hand she held a crumpled $5 bill. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Thomas asked, setting down the stack of picture books. The girl straightened her shoulders as if she'd practiced this moment. "I want to buy a dad, a real one. I have $5. Is that enough?" Thomas felt the air leave his lungs. Around them, the bookstore continued its quiet hum, the soft jazz playing from the speakers, the rustle of pages, the distant ding of the register. But in that moment, everything felt suspended. "Sweetheart, I don't—" He stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. "What's your name?" "Sophie," she said. "Sophie Chen. And I know $5 isn't a lot, but it's all I have right now. I've been saving for 3 weeks." She held out the bill with both hands, like an offering. "I checked other places first. The toy store said they don't sell dads. The grocery store laughed at me. But this is a bookstore, and books have everything, so I thought maybe you'd know where I could find one." Thomas knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the kind that doesn't belong on a child. Dark circles under her eyes, chapped lips, a small bruise on her chin that was healing yellow-green. "Sophie, honey, you can't buy a father. They're not. They're not something you purchase. I know people usually get them for free," she said, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality, as if she'd explained this before. "But I don't have the free kind. My mom says free things run out first, so I'm willing to pay. That way, he has to stay. That's how buying works, right? When you pay for something, it's yours, and it can't just leave." The logic was heartbreaking in its simplicity. "Where is your mother now?" Thomas asked gently. Sophie's eyes darted toward the door. "She's working. She works a lot. 3 jobs, actually. I'm supposed to stay at Mrs. Patterson's apartment after school, but Mrs. Patterson fell asleep, and I got hungry, so I came out to look." She paused. "And to find a dad store. Are you hungry right now?" She nodded, then quickly shook her head. "I mean, I'm okay. I just thought if I had a dad, he could make dinner sometimes. That's what dads do in books. They make pancakes and help with homework and stay home when you're sick." Her voice grew quieter. "Mine left before I was born. Mom says he didn't want to be a dad, but I thought, if I could buy one who already wanted the job, it would work out better." Thomas felt something crack open in his chest, a place that had been sealed shut for years, ever since his own daughter had. No, he couldn't think about Emma right now. Not here. Not while this little girl stood in front of him, trying to purchase love with pocket change. "Sophie," he said carefully, "I can't sell you a father, but I can give you something else right now. How about we go to the cafe next door and get you something warm to eat? Then we can figure out how to get you back to Mrs. Patterson safely." She studied him with those 2 old eyes, weighing whether to trust him. "You're not going to call the police, are you?" "No police," he promised. "Just food, and maybe we can talk a bit. Would that be okay?" After a long moment, Sophie nodded. She put the $5 bill back in her pocket, carefully folding it into a tiny square. Then she followed Thomas out of the bookstore, staying 3 steps behind him, the way cautious animals do. The cafe, Rosie's Cup, smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls. Rosie herself, A woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and laugh lines around her eyes took one look at Sophie and didn't ask questions. She just brought out hot chocolate and grilled cheese, along with a bowl of tomato soup that steamed gently. Sophie ate slowly at first, as if she wasn't sure the food would stay, but hunger won out. She finished everything, then looked up at Thomas with surprise, as if she hadn't expected to still be there. "Why are you being nice to me?" she asked. "Because you deserve kindness," Thomas said simply. "I tried to buy a dad. That's weird." "It's not weird. It's honest and brave." He leaned back in the booth. "Can I ask you something, Sophie? Why now? Why did you decide to go looking today?" She traced patterns in the condensation on her water glass. "Tomorrow's my birthday. I'm turning 9. And I thought maybe if I had a dad by tomorrow, he could come to my birthday. Mom's going to try to get off work early, but she might not. She couldn't last year." Sophie's voice dropped. "It's hard having birthdays by yourself." Thomas felt the weight of those words settle over him. 8 birthdays. This child had lived through 8 birthdays, and how many had she spent alone? "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to really hear it. You cannot buy a father, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve one. It doesn't mean you're not worth someone staying for. Do you understand?" Sophie looked at him, and for the first time, her composure cracked. Her eyes filled with tears that she blinked away furiously. "Then why doesn't anyone stay?" "Sometimes," Thomas said slowly, "people leave because of their own broken pieces, not because of anything you did or didn't do. And sometimes—" He stopped, his throat tight. "Sometimes the people who stay aren't the ones you expect." They sat in silence for a while, the cafe bustling around them. Finally, Thomas made a decision that would change both their lives. "Sophie, I need to take you home now, or back to Mrs. Patterson's. But before I do, I want to make you a promise." He pulled out one of his business cards and wrote his cell number on the back. "This is my number. If you ever need help, if you're scared or hungry or just want to talk, you call me, day or night. Can you do that?" She took the card, holding it like it was made of glass. "Really? Really? Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Thomas thought about Emma, about the daughter he'd lost 5 years ago to leukemia, about the empty rooms in his house and the silence that never went away, about how he'd buried himself in the bookstore afterward because books didn't leave, didn't die, didn't break your heart. But maybe, just maybe, there was still a broken piece of him that could be useful to someone else. "Because someone should have made that promise to me once," he said, "and they didn't. So I'm making it to you." Sophie slipped the card into her pocket next to the $5 bill, and when Thomas walked her back to Mrs. Patterson's apartment building, she turned, before going inside, and said something that would haunt him for weeks. "If you change your mind about selling dads, I'll save up more money. I'm a really good saver." Then she disappeared through the door, leaving Thomas standing on the sidewalk in the rain, wondering what he'd just started. He didn't know then that Sophie would call that number. He didn't know that her mother, Elena Chen, was holding on by a thread. He didn't know that in 3 weeks, everything would fall apart. And he didn't know that sometimes, when you're not trying to replace what you've lost but simply trying to help someone who needs you, you might accidentally find a reason to live again. The phone call came at 2 in the morning on a Thursday in November. Thomas was awake. He was always awake these days, sleep being something that happened to other people when his cell phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello?" Silence. Then barely a whisper. "Mr. Reed?" He sat up immediately. "Sophie, I'm sorry to call so late." Her voice was shaking. "But you said day or night, and it's night, and I didn't know what else to do." "It's okay. I meant what I said. What's wrong?" "My mom didn't come home." The words tumbled out fast. "She was supposed to be here by midnight. She always comes home by midnight, even when she works the late shift at the hospital. But it's been 2 hours, and she's not answering her phone. And Mrs. Patterson is asleep again, and I checked the hallway in case Mom fell down or something, but she's not there, and I don't know. Sophie, breathe. Just breathe for me. Thomas was already pulling on his shoes. Are you safe right now? Are you inside with the door locked? Yes. Good. Keep it locked. I'm going to come over, okay? And we're going to figure this out together. You're really coming? I'm already out the door. He drove across town faster than he should have, his mind racing through possibilities. Elena Chen worked 3 jobs. He'd learned that much from Sophie during their brief conversation at the cafe. One at a hospital as a janitor, one at a grocery store, one doing overnight data entry. She was a single mother doing everything humanly possible to keep her daughter fed and housed. What if she'd been in an accident? What if she'd collapsed from exhaustion? What if he forced himself to focus on the road? Sophie's apartment building was one of those old brick structures that had seen better decades. Peeling paint, broken security door, dim hallway lights that flickered like dying fireflies. Thomas found apartment 3B and knocked softly. The door opened immediately. Sophie stood there in oversized pajamas with cartoon cats on them, her face pale and scared. "You came," she breathed. "I promised, didn't I?" She nodded and stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was tiny. One main room that served as living room, dining room, and kitchen, all at once. A bathroom so small you'd have to step out to change your mind. 2 doors off the main room, one led to what looked like a closet-sized bedroom with a twin mattress on the floor, the other to an even smaller space that might have once been a storage area, but now held Sophie's bed and a cardboard box of clothes. But despite its size, the place was meticulously clean. Photos on the walls, Sophie at different ages, always smiling, always with her mother. A small bookshelf made from cinder blocks and boards, filled with library books, a card table with 2 chairs. On the kitchen counter, a birthday cake in a plastic container with "Happy 9th Birthday, Sophie," written in shaky icing. Thomas felt his throat tighten. "Has your mom been acting different lately?" he asked, sitting on the worn couch. "Sick, maybe? More tired than usual?" Sophie settled next to him, pulling her knees to her chest. "She's always tired. But yeah, the last few days she's been worse." She said her chest hurt, but she said it was just stress. She said we couldn't afford a doctor right now because the rent was due and my school needed money for the field trip, and her voice cracked. I told her I didn't need to go on the field trip. I told her to go to the doctor. But she wouldn't. "Sophie, I need you to think carefully. Do you know which hospital she works at?" "Memorial. The big one downtown." Thomas pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call them. Maybe she's still there. Maybe her shift ran late." But even as he dialed, he had a sinking feeling. The hospital's night receptionist was polite but firm. No, they couldn't give out information about employees to non-family members. Yes, they'd pass along a message. No, she couldn't confirm whether Elena Chen had finished her shift. Thomas hung up, frustrated. He looked at Sophie, who was watching him with desperate hope. "Okay," he said. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to stay here with you tonight. I'll sleep on the couch. In the morning, we'll go to the hospital together and figure out what's going on. Your mom might have gone straight to her other job, or her phone might have died, or any number of normal explanations. But either way, you're not going to be alone. Deal?" "Deal," Sophie whispered. She brought him a pillow and a thin blanket, apologizing that they weren't nicer. Then she retreated to her tiny room. But 10 minutes later, she reappeared in the doorway. "Mr. Reed, you can call me Thomas." "Thomas, are you married? Do you have kids?" The question landed like a punch. He sat up slowly. "I was married once. My wife and I separated a few years ago, and I had a daughter, Emma. She was about your age when..." He stopped, the words catching. "She got sick. Leukemia. She didn't make it." Sophie came closer, her small face full of understanding that no 8-year-old should have to carry. "Is that why you helped me? Because of her? Maybe partly. But also because you reminded me that there are still people in the world worth showing up for, even when it's hard. She climbed onto the couch next to him, and without asking permission, curled up against his side. I'm sorry about Emma. I'm sorry about your dad. They sat like that for a long time. Two people who'd lost things they could never get back, finding a strange comfort in not being alone. Eventually, Sophie fell asleep. Thomas didn't. He stayed awake, one arm around this child who wasn't his, wondering how life could take you apart and then, without warning, hand you a piece that almost fit. When morning came, the truth arrived with it. Elena Chen had collapsed during her shift at the hospital, a massive heart attack brought on by years of overwork, stress, and untreated high blood pressure. She'd been rushed to the ICU. She was alive, but barely, and Sophie's world shattered all over again. The hospital social worker met them in the waiting room, a kind-faced woman named Patricia, who explained gently that Elena was in critical condition. Sophie could see her, but only briefly. Thomas held Sophie's hand as they walked down the sterile hallway to the ICU. Through the glass, they could see Elena, small and still, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed. Sophie pressed her palm against the glass. Is she going to die? I don't know, sweetheart, Thomas said honestly. If she does, where will I go? That was the question no one wanted to answer. Patricia pulled Thomas aside while Sophie stood vigil at the window. Are you family? No, I'm a friend. Does Sophie have any other relatives? Grandparents? Aunts? Or uncles? I don't know. Patricia's expression softened with sympathy and bureaucratic inevitability. If Mrs. Chen doesn't recover, or if her recovery takes a long time, Sophie will need to go into emergency foster care. The state requires. No. The word came out sharper than Thomas intended. I'm sorry, but no. That girl has been alone enough. She doesn't need to be thrown into a system where she's just another case file. Mr. Reed, I understand you care, but you're not a relative. You have no legal standing. Then tell me what I need to do to get standing. Patricia blinked. What? Tell me the process. For emergency foster placement, or guardianship, or whatever it takes to make sure Sophie doesn't end up in a group home with strangers while her mother fights for her life. Mr. Reed, that's a significant commitment. Have you thought this through? He looked at Sophie, still standing at the window, and thought about a little girl who'd tried to buy a father for $5. A girl who'd called him in the middle of the night because she trusted him to show up. A girl who deserved so much more than the hand life had dealt her. No, he admitted, I haven't thought it through at all. But I'm doing it anyway. And just like that, Thomas Reed, who'd spent 5 years avoiding attachment, stepped into the role he never planned to fill. The next 72 hours were a blur of paperwork, background checks, home visits, and legal consultations. Thomas learned more about the foster system than he'd ever wanted to know. He learned that good intentions aren't enough, that the state requires proof of stability, financial security, suitable living conditions, and a clean record. Fortunately, he had all of those things. What he didn't have was any idea how to be a parent again. Sophie stayed with him temporarily while Elena remained in the ICU. The social workers approved it barely because the alternative was worse, and because Sophie, when asked where she wanted to stay, had said simply, with Thomas. He's the only one who came. That first week, Thomas converted his spare bedroom into a space for Sophie. He bought a bed, a real bed, not a mattress on the floor. He filled the closet with clothes that actually fit her. He set up a desk by the window with school supplies and a reading lamp. Sophie stood in the doorway the first time she saw it, silent. Is this okay? Thomas asked, suddenly nervous. We can change anything you don't like. It's mine? Her voice was barely audible. It's yours. She walked in slowly, touching the bed, the desk, the curtains he'd hung that had stars on them. When she turned back to him, tears were streaming down her face. I've never had a room before, she whispered. Just the storage space, with Mom's stuff piled around me. Thomas knelt down. "Well, you have a room now, and it's going to be here for as long as you need it." She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her, this child who wasn't his, but somehow was becoming his anyway. School was another challenge. Sophie had been struggling academically, how could she not, given everything else, and was behind in reading and math, but she was brilliant in ways that didn't show up on tests. She noticed things, she asked questions, she had an imagination that could turn a cardboard box into a spaceship. Thomas started reading with her every night before bed. They'd sit side by side, sounding out words, talking about characters and plots. Sometimes she'd fall asleep mid-sentence, and he'd carry her to bed, tuck her in, and stand in the doorway for a moment, marveling at how quickly his life had changed. Elena remained in the ICU, then graduated to a regular room, then finally woke up. Sophie visited every day after school, holding her mother's hand, telling her about the bookstore and Thomas and the room with star curtains. Elena cried when she saw how well Sophie was being cared for. "Thank you," she whispered to Thomas one afternoon while Sophie was down the hall getting a snack from the vending machine. "Thank you for doing what I couldn't." "You kept her alive for 8 years on your own," Thomas said. "That's not nothing. That's everything. But I almost killed myself in the process." Elena's eyes were full of guilt and grief. "I thought if I just worked hard enough, I could give her the life she deserved. But I was wrong. I couldn't do it alone. None of us can do it alone." She studied him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this? Really?" Thomas thought about Emma, about the years he'd wasted being angry at God, at the universe, at himself, about the emptiness that had defined his life since her death. "Because Sophie asked me if she could buy a father," he said. "And I couldn't get that question out of my head. No child should ever think love is something they have to purchase. So, I guess I'm trying to show her that some people stay just because they choose to." Elena reached out and squeezed his hand. "If I don't make it, you're going to make it." "But if I don't," she insisted, "promise me you'll keep her. Don't let her go into the system. Promise me." The weight of that promise settled over Thomas like a cloak. "I promise." Elena did make it. After 6 weeks, she was discharged with a strict regimen of medication, dietary changes, and orders to reduce her stress, which meant she couldn't work 3 jobs anymore, which meant they needed help. Thomas didn't hesitate. He hired Elena to manage the bookstore's inventory and online orders work she could do from home, on a flexible schedule, for a salary that would actually cover rent and bills. "You don't have to do this," Elena protested. "I know I want to." And so, their lives intertwined further. Sophie lived primarily with Thomas during the week because his house was closer to school, and Elena needed rest to recover. Weekends, Sophie stayed with her mother. It was an unconventional arrangement, but it worked. Months passed. Sophie's 9th birthday came and went, celebrated with cake and presents and people who showed up. She started doing better in school. The hollows under her eyes filled in. She smiled more. She stopped flinching when adults approached her. One night, about 4 months after that first phone call, Sophie was doing homework at the kitchen table while Thomas made dinner. She looked up suddenly. "Thomas? Yeah? Can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you think... if someone doesn't have a dad by birth, can they choose one?" Thomas set down the spatula, his heart suddenly pounding. "What do you mean?" "I mean like..." She struggled for words. "Like, you're not my dad by blood, but you do dad things. You make me breakfast and help with homework and come to school conferences and remember what I like and don't like. You came when I called at 2 in the morning. You stayed." Her voice grew quieter. "So even though I can't buy you, and we're not related, could I call you Dad?" The kitchen seemed to hold its breath. Thomas walked over and sat down next to her. "Sophie, I would be honored, but I need to make sure you understand something. If you call me Dad, I'm in this for real, forever. Not because you paid me, not because it's convenient, but because I choose you. And I'll keep choosing you every single day. Can you handle that?" She nodded, tears spilling over. "Can you handle me?" He pulled her into a hug. "Sweetheart, you're the best thing that's happened to me in 5 years. So yeah, I can handle you." She wrapped her arms around him and whispered into his shirt, "Okay, Dad." And Thomas, who'd been certain his heart had died with Emma, felt it crack back open. The formal adoption process took another 8 months. Elena supported it fully. She loved her daughter, but she also knew she couldn't give Sophie the stability and security Thomas could provide. They agreed on shared custody. Elena would always be mom, always be part of Sophie's life, but Thomas would be her legal father and primary guardian. On the day the adoption was finalized, they all went to the courthouse together. The judge, a gray-haired woman who'd seen every kind of family arrangement imaginable, smiled when she saw them. "This is an unusual case," she said, "but also one of the most hopeful I've seen. Mr. Reed, do you understand what you're committing to?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Miss Chen, you're certain about this arrangement?" "Absolutely. Thomas has given my daughter something I couldn't, not just financial security, but emotional stability. He's shown her what it means to be chosen." The judge looked at Sophie. "And you, young lady, are you happy with this decision?" Sophie, wearing a new dress and her hair in careful braids, nodded solemnly. "I tried to buy a dad once, but I'm glad I found one who wanted me instead." The judge's eyes softened. "Then by the power vested in me by the state, I hereby grant this adoption. Sophie Chen. You are now Sophie Reed. Congratulations to all of you." In the hallway afterward, friends from the bookstore, from school, from the neighborhood gathered to celebrate. Someone had brought balloons. Rosie from the cafe had baked a cake. It was chaotic and joyful and overwhelming. But the moment Thomas remembered most clearly came that evening, after everyone had gone home. Sophie was getting ready for bed when she appeared in his doorway, holding something in her hands. "I want to show you something," she said. She held out a small box, the kind jewelry comes in. Inside, pressed flat between layers of tissue paper, was a crumpled $5 bill. "I kept it," Sophie said. "The $5 I was going to use to buy a dad. I kept it all this time. Why? Because I wanted to remember that once I thought I had to pay for love. But then I met you, and you showed me that the best things in life can't be bought." She paused. "I want you to have it now, not as payment, but as, I don't know, a reminder, maybe?" Thomas took the box, his vision blurring. "A reminder of what? That good people exist, that some people stay. That family isn't about money or blood, it's about who shows up when you need them." He pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in years, Thomas Reed felt complete. Over the following years, life continued its beautiful, messy unfolding. Sophie thrived. Elena recovered and found work she loved. Thomas learned that being a father the second time was different from the first, not better or worse, just different. He couldn't replace Emma. He didn't try. But he could love Sophie with his whole heart, scars and all. The bookstore became a gathering place for other kids who needed refuge. Thomas started a program called Page by Page that provided free books and tutoring to children from struggling families. Sophie helped run it, her natural empathy making her a magnet for the younger kids. On Sophie's 13th birthday, Thomas gave her a journal. Inside the front cover he'd written, "To Sophie, who taught me that when you've lost everything, sometimes all you need to do is open a door. Thank you for knocking on mine. Love, Dad." She read it, tears streaming down her face, and hugged him tight. That night, before bed, she asked him, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd said no that day I came into the bookstore?" "Every single day," Thomas admitted. "What do you think would have happened to me?" He considered lying, softening the truth. But Sophie had never needed protecting from reality. She'd lived it. She needed honesty. "I don't know. Maybe foster care. Maybe something worse. Maybe you would have found someone else to help you. Or maybe you would have kept surviving on your own, the way you'd been doing. But you said yes." "I said yes." "Why?" It was a question she'd asked before, and would probably ask again. Because children who've been abandoned need to hear, over and over, that they're worth staying for. Because when you asked if you could buy a father, you didn't just break my heart. You reminded me that I still had one, that I was still capable of loving someone, even after losing everything. You gave me a reason to stop hiding from life. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. So really, Sophie, you didn't buy a dad. You saved one. She smiled, that quiet smile she gave when she knew something true. I think we saved each other, and she was right. The story of Thomas and Sophie Reed became one of those quiet miracles that doesn't make headlines but changes the world anyway. They proved that family isn't defined by biology but by choice. That love isn't something you buy or earn, it's something freely given by people brave enough to open their hearts even when they're broken. They proved that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply answering the phone at 2 in the morning, showing up, staying. And they proved that, in a world full of people looking for reasons to turn away, all it takes is one person willing to turn toward the need in front of them to change everything. Years later, at Sophie's high school graduation, she gave a speech. She talked about resilience, about community, about the power of second chances. But what people remembered most were her closing words. When I was 8 years old, I went into a bookstore and asked if I could buy a father. I didn't understand then that the best things in life, love, belonging, home, can't be purchased. They can only be chosen. Today, I want to thank the man who chose me when he didn't have to, who taught me that family is built not through transactions but through trust, who showed up day after day, even when it was hard. Dad, this diploma belongs to both of us. Thank you for staying. The audience erupted in applause. Thomas sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face, thinking about a rainy October afternoon when a desperate child had walked into his bookstore with $5 and a hope that nearly destroyed him. She'd asked if she could buy a father. He'd said no, but he'd become one anyway, and in the end, that made all the difference. This is a story about the transformative power of showing up, about how one moment of compassion can ripple across years and reshape 2 lives, about how we heal not by forgetting our losses but by loving again despite them. It's a reminder that every person who crosses your path is an opportunity to help, to heal, to choose love over indifference, that the smallest acts of kindness can become the foundation of something extraordinary. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it. Not because I need the attention, but because somewhere, someone is standing where Sophie once stood. Someone is desperate and alone, wondering if they matter. And maybe, just maybe, your willingness to share this story will remind them that good people still exist, that some people still stay. That love, real love, is always worth the risk.